I can remember this story. You may have heard it before. I love to tell lots of stories. I'm that old. In my own family, my oldest son, when he was maybe 3 years old, we had a family friend that was getting married, and they invited him to be the ring bearer in the wedding. And so, I guess he said yes. I don't think he had a choice in the matter. But, as weddings are, this thing is months away. And we hadn't really talked about it. It was just a foregone thing, like, yeah, we're going to go to this deal. And, away we go. And I can still remember we were traveling. This would be a month or so maybe before the wedding. We're traveling from Nacogdoches up to Oklahoma. And I can remember the exit that we were on when, for some reason, we're talking about it. When you're driving, you're the dad, you're looking up in the rearview mirror, and you can kind of see your kid in the car seat, and they're talking, and he's talking about this wedding, and he just really offhand goes, "So am I gonna get like a bear suit or something?" And at that moment, it was a real moment for me to be like, oh, this kid is seriously going to be disappointed. Because you're going, well, it's bearer as in to carry, to never mind, right? And just the kind of the look on his face of just disappointment. Like, oh, I thought this was going to be fun. And like, no, you're going to have to stand still. And like, you actually don't even get to carry the rings, but it's like a pillow thing. And they don't trust you with that stuff. Anyway, it's a real honor. Do it. You'll wear rented clothes. It'll be awesome, But I can just remember on his face that look of disappointment of, this is not working like I thought it was going to work, right? This is not as advertised. And today we're in Matthew chapter 7. And I think that story just fits because in Matthew 7, beginning in verse 7, we see Jesus talking about prayer. And if you've been a believer for any amount of time at all, I think you've had plenty of opportunity to be disappointed in prayer. Have you? In fact, if you grew up in a Christian home, you were taught, and rightly so, to pray even before you were a Christian. You would maybe say your prayers at night. Your family might pray before meals. You might have, various and different kinds of prayer. And then all of you students were praying like last Thursday, please overcome my skipping class all this time, right? So maybe you had a chance to be disappointed by prayer even last week, right? We've all, if you've been a believer for any amount of time, you've been disappointed by prayer. That you've seen other people that it really seems to work like for them. In fact, I have some of my own family members that would talk about my grandmother as though she had like a red phone to God. They would go, well, get grandma to pray because then, good things happen, right? And it just always struck me as odd. And you may feel that way, that like, well, I'm disappointed by it. Everyone else must be better at it. Perhaps I should be doing it more often. Maybe I stopped doing it because I didn't get anything that I asked for. In fact, the things that I did ask for, the situation just got worse. You may have a view of God that just says, well, he's got everything figured out anyway, so like, why am I even bothering him? He's going to do what he wants to do. I know that I've lived in that one where you thought, well, he's God. He's going to do what he wants to do anyway. We don't have to pretend, that this is a real thing. And it's a horrible way to live. But in full disclosure, there have been times in life that's just called fatalism, right? Of like it's the Calvin and Hobbes view of theology of like he wrecked his bike, like glad I got that over with. That is just sort of a foregone conclusion. Is it possible? I think it is. I think we'll see today. Is it possible that one of the reasons why we don't, pray as often or as effectively or as fervently or as sort of expectantly, is it possible that our prayer life's not what we wanted it to be? It doesn't have the warmth, if you will, or the goodness or the benefits. Is it possible that it's because we've kind of misunderstood it in some way? Now, you may be thinking, yeah, I've misunderstood it just like my son misunderstood the ring bearer, right? As it's been oversold to me, and it turns out it's a far lesser enjoyable process. I'm going to argue that the Scripture is going to show us that we really do have a tendency, me included, to misunderstand prayer. And by misunderstanding prayer, meaning we have this ability to think of God in a way that He is not, right? To think of Him in a way that He's not, to sort of relate to Him as a certain thing or person that we've assumed, as opposed to allowing Him to be who He actually is. So if you're in Matthew chapter 7, and we'll begin in verse 7, I'll read through verse 12. And He says, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks the door will be opened. Which of you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you, then though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask Him? So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets." Prayer is something that is easily misunderstood. And you are in very common company if you feel as though you've always misunderstood it. I would even argue, congratulations, you're normal, right? That if it has been a difficult thing for you, you're pretty normal. Because it's a strange thing to enter into, period, isn't it? You're talking to someone you can't see. In any other circumstance, right, there's medication for that, right? That someone would say, hey, you're really struggling with just connection in life, and your mind is betraying you. And yet, we would say, no, we're having communication, actually, with the God of the universe. We misunderstand prayer, I think, first, when we begin to relate to God as a reluctant stranger. As a reluctant stranger. One who has to be sort of harassed, begged, or convinced into bestowing gifts. Let's look in verse 7 again where He says, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be open to you." When we read that and we see the repetition of asking, knocking, and seeking, and those being in a sort of a continuous present, if you will, my mind, and I think your mind, probably immediately goes to this idea of a strenuousness and a continuous nature, and you need to do this repeatedly, right? That we see that. He says, ask. And He says, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be open to you. Now, initially, you probably saw that as like an easy thing of like just ask, and 6 seconds later, here's your answer. Knock, and the door is immediately open. In fact, when you go to your neighbor's house, if you knock on the door, you don't have the anticipation that you're going to stand there and knock all day. You don't have the anticipation that you're going to ask, right? That's not how you would think of it. You would expect a more immediate sort of answer. And so when we ask God things, particularly early on in the lives of our praying, we do. We look at that and go, wow, it says ask and it will be given to you. It says seek and you'll find it. Knock and the door will be open to you. And then a promise, for everyone who asks receives. He who seeks finds, and to him who knocks the door will be opened. Yet you ask and you don't receive exactly what you asked for, right? You seek and you don't necessarily find exactly what it is you were looking for. You knock, and from your perspective, no one is answering that door. And in the midst of that, we begin to get an idea of who we think God is, and we begin to relate to Him as a reluctant stranger. By reluctant stranger, I mean this. Unless you're among just a very small portion of society who's just profoundly generous, if somebody were to knock on your door, a stranger, or someone approach you on the street and just say, hey, brother, can you help me out? I need you to give me $300, I need some help. What is your first response? It's like, who are you? Even if you're kind, right? Who are you? Why do you need the money? What's your story? Is this a scam? Right? You're going to want a lot more information, aren't you? Very few of you are just going to peel out the money. Here you go, brother. Go on your way. After all you ask, and here we are, right? No, is you feel like, I have some questions. Why are you asking for this? Am I being taken advantage of? And so what are you? You're the reluctant stranger. Of going, maybe I'll help you, but I got to know a lot more about you before I'm just going to do this. Right? And you've had experience with enough people coming up and asking you that you realize that maybe for good or ill, that maybe most of the people that ask you don't really have a need in that way. And so what? You're even harder to convince, aren't you? Especially if you've been taken advantage of before. If somebody's beaten you out of this, if you've loaned some money to somebody, they've never paid you back, then what does that make you? More and more of a reluctant stranger. And so, right, in some ways we relate to God really like sort of we are. And then we look at this verse and we go, well, I asked, I didn't immediately get. I sought, I didn't immediately find. I knocked, it seemed like no one was actually answering. And so maybe what God wants, maybe what he wants is to be convinced, right? He's willing to help, but I have to convince him that I'm worthy of being helped. You follow me? Like that person that comes up and asks you for that money, going, you're willing to help as the reluctant stranger, but you have a lot of questions. And if that person then is able to answer your questions to your liking or sufficiently, give you enough information to where you think they're legitimate in their concern, then you're like, okay, I'll help them. Think of this in your own prayer life. If you're one who has begun possibly to relate to God as though he is this reluctant stranger, your prayers would go something like, God, I have helped so many other people. God, I have taken care of your children, my own children, which are sort of in your hands. God, I have been faithful in all of these other ways. All I'm asking for is this. God, I've been faithful in church. I've been faithful to share the gospel. I've been faithful to do these sorts of things. I've been faithful and kind to other people. All I'm asking for is this. Right? And so in that, you didn't mean to, but you began to relate to him as this reluctant stranger of either going, look, just to let you know, I'm legit, right? I'm not trying to scam you. It's okay to answer my prayer. I could have that. And also, just so you know, what I'm asking for is not what I could be asking for. Right? I'm minimizing it. All I'm asking for is this. It's just a small thing. I mean, you and I both know I'd really like to ask you for the big thing, but you and I both know you're probably not going to give me the big thing. So I'm going to ask you for the smaller thing. And we relate to him as this reluctant stranger. And think about it. If you've begun to relate to God as a reluctant stranger, how excited are you about praying? Because you're not. Nobody wants to have a conversation with someone to where they're feeling as though they have to beg. Nobody wants to have a conversation with someone where they're feeling as though they have to convince someone to do something. Shoot, it's not just reluctant stranger. It might just be like reluctant spouse, right? If you want to have something, you have a plan for a particular amount of money or something in your own home, and there's a conversation about how that money is going to be spent, and you know that conversation is always going to go bad, you're not really excited. I've never lived this. I'm just saying you guys. You know that you're not really excited about having that conversation because why? Because you feel like you're having a conversation with a reluctant stranger. And that you're not going to get what you want anyway, or you're going to have to present this massive case to them, and so why do it? What if we didn't look at God as this reluctant stranger, but we looked at him as a faithful Father? who's giving an invitation and just took it at that face value. Even if you didn't understand all of the particulars of it, you just were able to embrace the personality that is asking you. And that's one who's saying, ask, and it will be given to you. Right? It's like when you're going into your friend's home and they said, hey, if you need something to eat, just jump in the fridge there and get what you need. And depending on the family you grew up in, you'll either touch that fridge or you won't, right? Of going, well, I know they say it because you're supposed to say it, but don't get anything out of the fridge. We're not that poor, right? There's all those sorts of things. So do you really believe that when he says ask, that he means that? Of just going, yeah, ask. That it is an invitation to ask. It is an invitation to seek. It's an invitation to knock. And then there's this assurance of saying, for everyone who asks, receives, who seeks, finds, and to him who knocks, the door will be open. But Justin, I didn't get all those things. We'll get to that in a minute. I'm just saying, is it possible that you've begun to relate to God as a reluctant stranger as opposed to a faithful father? And I think in addition to relating to him as a reluctant stranger, some of us have begun to relate to God as kind of a shady salesman. I'm not mentioning any particular industry because there's not that doesn't, it's not across everything, but you've all encountered a shady salesman. You've all encountered a shady business. You've all encountered a shady something, right? A person who does not have your best interest in mind. If you've been to the state fair, right? If you've been on the Midway, you've encountered people who were not completely on the up and up. Not just like the crowd. I mean, just the whole shadiness of everything that's going on there. In fact, you can see it here. The shady salesman or the heartless trickster, right? That's one who takes pleasure in kind of deliberately giving the opposite or something different than what was requested, right? The one who honestly is not in it for you. They're in it for them. They want you to think that they're in it for you, but they're not. They're in it for them. And so after Jesus had just said, hey, ask and it will be given, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open, he says in verse 9, which of you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? Right? He's like, that's ridiculous. That no person would do that to their kid. No reasonable parent, right, would do that to their kid. So it's emphasizing, it says, which of you, if his son asked for bread, would give him a stone? He's going, there's a family relationship there that he's emphasizing. Which of you, if the one that you love, the one that's closest to you, you probably wouldn't even give us, you wouldn't like fake out even a stranger, but in particular, you wouldn't do that to a family. It says, which of you would do that? Of course, the answer is like, well, none of us would do that. None of us would deliberately give someone the opposite of what they were asking for. None of us would deliberately try and be shady. And he says, but he asked for a fish, would give him a snake, and he goes, well, then think about it. If you then, though you were evil, and by the evil he doesn't mean that you were as evil that you all demonstrate your evilness in its greatest possible degree, but he's just going, as you are evil, meaning that you're a broken person. You have the capacity to do that, where God doesn't even have the capacity to do that. So he goes, if you are evil, you have the capacity to do this sort of thing. He says, if you then, though you have the capacity to do this, you know how to give good gifts to your children, emphasizing the family relationship, how much more will your Father in heaven, who doesn't have the capacity for evil, give good gifts to you? Right? So you've had those prayers that you kind of gave up on because you felt as though you couldn't convince God that you were worthy, or that you had to spend all of your time trying to convince this reluctant stranger. But some of us have prayed for things, and the opposite did happen. You prayed for a family member to live, and they didn't. You prayed for your marriage to be preserved, and it wasn't. You prayed for a relationship to be restored, and it wasn't. You prayed for a job to be gotten, and it wasn't. You prayed for, a different opportunity, and it didn't come. Or you got something completely different, And in that, what you received was not what you prayed for. And so in your own estimation, since you didn't receive what you prayed for, then you must have gotten something worse there. And so in your mind, you don't really choose to think this, but you just kind of end up thinking this. Of going, you know what? God must just have a real weird sense about him. And that he takes some delight in giving me the opposite because he likes to watch me squirm. Everybody else, they seem to do okay, but he must like to watch me squirm. So you begin looking around you and you see other people in the midst of their prayers, and now that's all working, and it's frustrating to you, right? And you just start thinking that maybe he's deliberately doing that. Maybe he gives me the opposite of whatever it is that I want. And we look at it and go, no. I don't know what happened there, but in some sense, right, you stop praying, right? Some things you don't pray for because you're like, he's going to do the opposite. Father, I'll do whatever you want me to do in my career. You're not praying for that because you're like, he's going to send me to Africa. You immediately think he's going to do the opposite, right? Father, I'm content with being single. He's going to make you that, right? Father, it's okay if I, remain in this position in my job forever. Good, because that's what I'm going to make you do, right? It's okay if I'm not, renowned or something like that. Boom, it's going to happen. So see, we began to relate to him as though he's this shady salesman, that whatever it is we ask, he's going to do the opposite. And again, he calls us back to a faithful Father. And he's saying, in your own family, your father, if you had a good one, he had the capacity for evil, but even in the capacity for evil, he would give you good. He would give you good. We're going in the midst of our prayers, we look at God as a faithful Father who does not have the capacity for evil, who is altogether good. So whatever it is he ends up giving me, even if I don't understand that, what I can understand is he did not deliberately bring about harm in long term and evil for me. He didn't deliberately give me the opposite that I requested just to bring about my harm. That he is not the God that you have to be careful of, right? Right? So when you think about approaching a reluctant stranger, you know that you've got to be careful around them. You've got to watch your words. You've got to make sure to say those words exactly right, or you're not going to qualify for a gift. But then the other time, if you're going to this sort of shady salesman, right, you're already in a position of vulnerability. They're the ones that have the power in the relationship. They're the ones that are selling the product. You're the one that knows less about the product. You don't know all these sorts of things, right? You don't have all the information. You don't have all the time in the world. You don't have the power. And so what you're having to rely upon is the character of the salesperson. And so when you enter into those, what are you right now? You're already nervous, right? You're nervous in asking. You're nervous in exposing yourself. You're nervous in being vulnerable because you might be taken advantage of. Because you just know how those salesmen work. And you may approach God in the same way of going, I'm really scared to be vulnerable here. I'm really scared to ask for what I really want. I'm really scared to allow myself to be fully known by you, God, as though he doesn't already know you, right? I'm really scared because why? Because I'm afraid that you will take advantage of me. And you realize how easy that is for you to believe? Because if you are a person who has been taken advantage of in business or in relationship or that sort of thing, you tend to see that. You tend to see that all over. And it's going to affect your prayer life. And it's going to affect your ability to to ask. It's going to affect your ability to seek. It's going to affect your ability to knock because you feel like you might be taken advantage of. And so it's best to just be quiet. And in that, in some weird way, we sort of trick ourselves into thinking that now God won't know. But in reality, somehow we miss out on the beauty of what prayer can actually be. So in 9, when he says, which of you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone, or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you're evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? Then he says, so in everything do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets, or this fulfills the law and the prophets. And I think he put those in there kind of together for this reason. So I think that we, in this third aspect of kind of misunderstanding prayer, is we can begin to relate to God as what I would just call a divine enabler. A divine enabler. An enabler is this. If you've ever been in any therapy, or if you've had addiction or something in your family, let's say a person is addicted to substances or alcohol, that sort of thing, and you've realized that oftentimes there are close family members that make excuses for that person, that make allowances for them, that do things. They don't mean to, but they end up doing these things that allow this person to continue on in their destructive behavior. So in that sense, while they're not responsible for that behavior, they're enabling that behavior, right? They're allowing that to happen. Some of us have done that with our own children, right? We make excuses for little Johnny, the things that he's done, like, oh, he's just this way or whatever, and we allow that behavior to continue to happen. And here's the deal. We can look at God, and we can say, I'm asking you for things. God, if you really loved me, you would give me those things. So here's what I mean. When you begin to confront that person who is struggling with addiction, or that child who's being disobedient, and you're the one who has been enabling them, and if you haven't lived this right, when you're the one that's been enabling them and you go, hey, look, the plan is going to be different now. They're like, you don't love me. You're horrible. They scream all these awful things at you because they're doing their level best to try to blame you for every one of their issues. If you really loved me, you would give me these things. If you really cared about me, you would allow these things to happen. You're the worst. And then you're the enabler, feel awful, and so you cave in and you give it to them. And so the cycle continues. Look at how this relates in prayer. When he says, ask and it will be given, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. That you, maybe as one in life who has been given lots and lots of things, and you've been used to sort of getting your way. And then you don't get your way, and when that happens, you begin to question the love, attention, and affection of those who are not giving you what you want. And you know, lots of us, me included, honest to goodness, relate to God as a divine enabler, as in, it is your job to give me what I want. It's your job to give it to me. And if you don't give it to me, you don't love me. And if you don't give it to me in the amount that I want or in the time that I need it in, you don't love me. If you don't treat me as I want to be treated, then you don't love me. Then you don't care about me. Then you don't have my best interests in mind. And so we look at that last verse when he says, so in everything do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. Well, when that verse is read, we always immediately begin to think about how we should treat someone else. Do unto others as you would want them to do to you, right? Well, let's think about how would you want others to treat you? How do you want others to treat you? How do you want them to treat you? I would argue every person here, you want them to tell you the truth. You want them to tell you the truth, right? Nobody wants a relationship that's based on lies, half-truths, fabrications, right? You want them to tell you the truth. Until they tell you the truth sometimes. But at least at your core, you want them to tell you the truth. What else do you want? You want to know that you have their full attention. Right? If you're thinking about how do you want others to treat you, you want them to tell you the truth, you want to know that you have their full attention, don't you? You would want others to treat you that way. You want to know that when you're speaking to them, you have their undivided attention. That makes you feel loved. It makes you feel valued. You want to know that that other person understands you. Right? That it just means they appreciate your feelings. They understand you. Do you expect everyone to agree with you at every turn? No. But you do have this internal longing to be understood. And a healthy person can be disagreed with even if just as long as you feel understood, you can feel disagreed with. You're okay with that. Here's what else, fourth thing. There's probably more, but I said four. You would want them to act with your best interest in mind, right? Like you'd want them to know, like, hey, man, if you know that this is going to kill me, if you know that this boat is going to sink, don't let me buy it, right? Don't let me go down this path. If you know that this is going to happen, that's not going to have my best interest in mind, you would want that person to act on your behalf, right? You would want them to act with your best interest in mind, wouldn't you? You absolutely would. So he says, I want you in your human relationships to relate to one another this way. And I'm going to argue that he says, look, God relates to you in the same way. So when we think about our prayers, think about them this way when you're asking, when you're seeking, when you're knocking. That I'm not encountering a reluctant stranger, a heartless trickster, right, or this divine enabler, but I'm talking to a Father who loves me. And in your asking and in your seeking and your knocking, say these things. Father, above all, I want you to tell me the truth about me in a gentle way. Right? That's the asking, the seeking, and the knocking, because so much of prayer is learning about you. It's communication with God where you learn about you. Some of these are answered really quickly, and some of these take years and years and years. And if you're in a particularly hard time, I am not minimizing the difficulty of that. He's going, Father, just help me to hear the truth about me. But help me to believe, Father, that I really do have your full attention. I'm not interrupting you. I have your full attention, that you are listening to me. Help me, Father, to search the Scriptures in a way, to meditate upon this in a way, to think about this, to soak upon this in a way to where I can be convinced that you understand me. You may not agree with me, but you understand me. Right? You've empathized with me. And Father, I want you to act. That's when we say, Father, if it be your will, what we're saying is, Father, I want you to act with my best interests in mind. And I know you will. Would that change the way you prayed? Would it make you more willing to pray and to ask and to seek and to knock? And what would be different if you didn't look at God as this ring bearer or bearer? If you sort of saw him rightly as he is, of this faithful Father who is there, ready to listen with his full attention and to understand. Now, as I close in prayer, I want to pray specifically for those of you who've been praying about horrible, awful things that are happening to you, near you, around you, and you have not received answer, guidance, or you're still in the midst of great pain. I just want to pray for you in particular. Heavenly Father, I don't know what these great pains are. I cannot take them away. I can't even explain exactly, precisely, outside of just living in a broken world, why those pains are here. Father, would you draw near to those who are in this pain. Father, would you wash over them the confidence in knowing that you have not forgotten them? Father, would you rekindle within them the desire and the willingness to have a conversation with you about their circumstances? Father, would you help them to feel understood, to feel like you get them, that you hear them. And Father, if it would please you, and it's in keeping with your acting with their best interests in mind, would you answer their prayers sooner rather than later? In Christ's name I pray. Amen.